welcome. Let's just jump right into this explainer. Today, we're taking a completely bold journey into the absolute foundation of physics. We're talking about a revolutionary framework proposed by Arndt Michael Meyer, known as the NKE theory. And look, this isn't just some minor tweak to an existing formula, right? We're looking at a massive, ground-up paradigm shift, a completely new way of understanding how the universe operates, literally from the absolute beginning of nothingness to the complex structures we see all around us today. If you're someone who loves flipping the universe upside down and looking at it from an entirely fresh perspective, you're going to be absolutely captivated by this.
But to really get this theory, we kind of have to stop and ask ourselves a pretty uncomfortable question. Why did mainstream science effectively just stop searching for a true fundamental theory of everything almost a century ago? Well, the answer actually points right back to the Copenhagen interpretation. About 100 years ago, physics collectively threw its hands up and decided that understanding the ultimate foundation of reality was either, impossible or just irrelevant. They chose to calculate phenomena rather than explain their absolute underlying origins. Essentially, the scientific community got hyper-focused on the how much and completely stopped asking the ultimate why. There's actually a quote from the source material that hits the nail on the head regarding this mindset shift. It says, "For 100 years, physicists have been building better navigation systems without ever thinking about the asphalt of the road." It's a brilliant analogy, really. Think about it. Mainstream science has become insanely good at applied physics. We've got quantum mechanics, relativity, we can build lasers, GPS. We have absolutely amazing navigation systems. But according to Meyer, we are totally ignoring the fundamental layer of reality. We're ignoring the asphalt that actually makes all of this possible in the first place. And this historical roadblock, it brings us to a massive modern problem. We've got this stark contrast right now. On one side, you have the mainstream, which today is heavily guarded by massive data sets and large language models. These systems, and honestly their human creators, act like gatekeepers. They're bound by strict guardrails and often just outright reject or block new foundational theories. Why? Because they demand standard empirical proof for concepts that are pre-physical and inherently unprovable in a lab. They tend to block or destroy. But on the flip side, and this is where we want to focus, we have the pioneers, a much smaller number of people who take a positive, constructive approach. They build up. They dare to think without preconditions and rely on logical, circumstantial evidence, what the original text calls indigian bewijs, to logically deduce how the universe must work at its absolute core. So what does a true theory of everything actually demand? Look, clinging to century-old viewpoints is just a dead end here. If a theory has any preconditions, like assuming space, time, or energy already exist, then, well, it's not the ultimate theory, is it? So requirement number one, it absolutely must have zero preconditions. Second, it has to explicitly explain the exact link between absolute nothing and something. How do we get from void to reality? And third, because this fundamental process happens before physics as we can measure it even exists, it literally cannot be empirically proven with current physical instruments. You can't put nothingness in a petri dish. It can only be logically and causally deduced. Which brings us directly to Meyer's positive, constructive solution, NKE. In German, that stands for nichts, Christe etwas, which translates to nothing, crust, something. This is a foundational theory proposing that the entire universe, and absolutely all physical phenomena within it, emerge from one single self-reinforcing process. And crucially, this process originates in absolute nothingness. There are no alternate theories out there that don't immediately get disqualified for having preconditions. This is an elegant, bottom-up approach that builds a logical bridge straight from the absolute void to the reality we observe every day. At the very heart of the NKE theory is its core engine. Meyer calls this the Busfo process. So what is that? The Busfo process is an infinite pre-physical mechanism. Picture this. It begins with a virtually infinitesimal separation within absolute nothingness. Now, because this tiny separation doesn't perfectly reunite, it generates a difference. And this pure fundamental difference introduces the concept of time, a very simple before and after. That resulting difference creates the absolute first trace of structure, which eventually gives rise to space itself. It's literally the smallest, simplest conceivable mechanism that kickstarts the whole shebang. Now, what's really wild about the Busfo process is that it doesn't just happen once and call it a day. No, it is a continuous, self-reinforcing engine. The source material points out that it is limited only by itself. Since it's happening in nothingness, there's no external force, no friction to put the brakes on it. This unceasing, infinite process is exactly what drives the continuous expansion of the universe, everywhere, all at once. It's like this dynamic engine constantly humming in the background of reality. And according to NKE, structure builds from this process in a very linear, continuous way. Step 1 is what's called virgin busvo, where there is almost zero structure, just pure, unadulterated expansion. Step 2 is the emergence of dark matter. In this framework, dark matter is just the initial, very loose structure that barely interacts with anything. Then, step 3 leads to more complex structures, like stable resonances that we end up calling protons, and eventually heavy elements. What's a real game changer here is that this totally challenges the standard model's assumption that you absolutely need massive supernovas to cook up all the heavy elements. NKE suggests this structure building is a continuous linear process happening out in the universe all the time. Okay, so if this busfo process is constantly expanding and building structure, what's holding everything together? Enter the Mitzi effect, or the drag effect. This is NKE's completely redefined explanation for gravity. In this theory, gravity is no longer some standard, invisible, magical pulling force. Instead, it's just the effect of the busfo process pulling on already existing structure. Think of it like this. As the busfo process happens, it naturally drags existing structure along with it. And it makes perfect sense. The denser the local structure becomes, the stronger this drag effect gets. To really wrap our heads around this, let's look at the extremes. Meyer actually refers to this framework as a theory of maximum relativity. On one extreme, we have the virgin busvoid network. This is the purest space you can imagine, with almost zero structure. Because there's practically no structure, the Mitzi effect, that drag effect, is virtually zero, which just results in pure cosmic expansion. But then, look at the other extreme, the inside of a supernova or a superdense star. Here, the structure is unbelievably packed together. Consequently, the drag effect is at its absolute maximum, creating what we perceive as extreme gravitational pull. So gravity is simply relative to the density of the local structure. That's it. All right, let's look at how NKE elegantly unifies the four fundamental forces. Mainstream physics treats these as separate, somewhat mystical forces, right? While NKE just redefines them as interactions and resonances of structure. First, gravity, as we just saw, is simply the busfo process dragging on structure. Second, electromagnetism is just structure interacting directly with other structure. If their vibrations align, they attract or repel. Simple. Third, the weak nuclear force, actually not a force at all. It's just a measure of how stable a particular structural resonance is. And fourth, the strong nuclear force is merely the amount of energy you'd need to break or alter one of those stable resonances. In this view, the universe isn't puppeteered by invisible tethers. It's all driven by the physical resonance of structures. And this naturally leads us to what might be the most radical philosophy of the whole NKE theory. Are you ready? There are no particles. Seriously, completely forget about tiny, hard little spheres bouncing around. According to Meyer, everything is simply relative structure in nothingness. What we currently perceive as a solid particle, say an electron or a proton, is actually just a highly stable, three-dimensional resonance. It's a standing wave of structure created by the busfo process. And it only feels solid to us because our measuring instruments, and our own bodies for that matter, are made of this exact same relative structure. It's literally just structure measuring structure. Now, I know grasping all of this at once is incredibly demanding. The source text explicitly warns us about this, saying, we must apply divide and conquer to the theory of maximum relativity to avoid cognitive overload. And it's true. If we tried to calculate every single interaction of the infinite busfo process all at once, our brains, and honestly our most powerful computers, would just completely crash. To make this theory workable, to actually calculate it, we have to break it down piece by piece. We have to separate that pre-physical expansion from the physical structures we can actually model. Which brings us to a final, pretty provocative thought to wrap up this explainer. We've spent a century perfectly mapping the roads, relying on standard proofs, and fiercely guarding our old navigational models. But the NKR theory is inviting us to take a positive, constructive leap into the unknown. It asks us to look at the absolute foundation of reality without any preconditions. So here's what you should take away from all this. Are we brave enough to finally leave the mainstream navigation system behind, ignore the gatekeepers, and actually examine the asphalt? I really hope this explainer sparked your curiosity to look at the universe through an entirely new lens. Keep questioning, keep building up, and keep learning.